The U.S. is creating an alternative empire. It's not a classical empire, but it is a place that will be enormously strong and powerful, but will not be sucked into foreign wars, theoretically and hopefully, that a world empire is.
This is the Friends of History Debating Society. I am Gaius. Germanicus is here for a special edition. There is a new emperor sworn in at noontime on the 20th day of January, 2025, Donald John Trump. I immediately thought not of the new emperor, but of Tiberius, the emperor stepping down. Because in the last, I'm told, half hour, 15 minutes of Tiberius's time on the throne, an order was signed of pardons. There were pardons of the family of the Tiberius, but that's not what I'm looking at. I'm looking at three in particular. A member of Congress, Cheney, a member of the military, Milley, and the twist here is a member of the executive branch of the government, permanent executive branch of the government, Mr. Fauci, representing the civil service, the military, and the Republican style Congress. The pardons of those three were extraordinary because the only precedent for this, pardoning someone before a crime is identified, before there's accused, before there's a grand jury, before there's hearings, the only time that I'm seeing referenced in the in the write-up so far is Richard Nixon in September of 1974. Gerald Ford, his successor, pardoned him about all crimes to do with Watergate. That's the precedent. There is no similar statement yet for General Milley, former Congresswoman Cheney, and Dr. Fauci, reminding me immediately of Lucius Cornelius Sulla Felix. Sulla, a man who ran a revolution before Caesar's revolution. This is 1st century BCE. Germanicus and I are 1st century AD, and we learned this in school. Sitting here in Londinium, we're reminded suddenly of the proscriptions of Sulla. It had to do with the Civil War, and when Sulla won the battle back at Rome, he put out a list, and the list was all the powerful men who had opposed him while he was away in Greece winning battles for Rome. And they were to die, and their lands and money were to be forfeit. There were caveats. If you turn somebody in, you might get mercy. Or you could buy your way out, or you could swear allegiance to Sulla, maybe. But the proscriptions were ferocious, and they worked. The blood went on for years. The original two who had opposed Sulla, Marius and Cinna, were dead. So he was going after people who had supported him. It reminded me very much of the idea of giving someone defense before they've been accused of a crime. Where has that happened before? Richard Nixon. But now it's happened with Joe Biden. This is not finished business, but there is this. The Trump campaign has talked a big game, but they've done nothing about charging, about accusing, about declaring, about a grand jury. Nothing. Talk. Campaign talk. From the inaugural address by Mr. Trump in these last hours, I heard nothing about arrests or grand juries or detentions. But the president on his way out, President Biden, forgave and pardoned for crimes not named. This will not end well. But I turn to my friend Germanicus because he has an uplifting point about this speech as well, mentioning a previous president who came to tragedy, but in any event was an opening for revival of the Republic at the end of the 19th century. His name was McKinley. Germanicus, a very good evening to you. While I'm on the dark side about these possible prescriptions that the Democrats fear the Republicans haven't done. You're on the bright side about McKinley. What did you hear that connected you to then and now? Good evening to you.
Good evening, Gaius. Whereas blue for the last 8 years has been locked into, as you point out so eloquently, a late Republican Roman path toward decomposition of the entire constitutional order by creating a combat to the death between the two dominant political factions. I thought Mr. Trump rose to the occasion, as it were. And of course, he's had years to consider what that moment would be. And he chose in this moment, in the rotunda, in front of the statues of Lincoln and Grant, in front of two gigantic murals that represented the ultimate moment of America's birth, the surrender of the British at Yorktown. He chose to talk about the kind of vision of America in the world that harkened back to an earlier, perhaps illustrious predecessor, President McKinley. And, McKinley, thanks to Mr. Hanna, was elected in 1896 on a great landslide and set the course for the United States for decades to come, at least under Republicans. And McKinley's concept was to create, shall we say, a great American realm. In other words, the United States had completed its continental expansion, its earlier manifest destiny, from sea to shining sea, in 1846 at the end of the war with Mexico. But at the time of McKinley, things had changed. Alaska had been acquired in the late 1860s, and then also Hawaii, which was acquired during McKinley's time, and then on to the farther reaches of the Pacific, because, of course, the Spanish-American War created the larger dominions that we still embrace as our own. You can go back to American Samoa in 1887, but then you have what are now considered the Federated States of Micronesia, Guam, the area of Saipan, northern Micronesia, and as well the Philippines. And that became America's perch on its larger realm. And today it still survives. So today we have Japan and the ROC, the Republic of Korea, which is to say South Korea, also the Philippines, Northern Marianas, Saipan, then Guam, and the Federated States of Micronesia, also Australia, thanks to developments that occurred actually in the Biden administration. We have Samoa, what has been created over the decades, going back to McKinley, is an American realm which, along with the rest of North America and potentially South America as well, and maybe other places that are part of the geological tectonic massif of North America, like Greenland, can be part of this world, which would be essentially the sustainable world power America going forward in a context not unlike the context of the late 19th century, where America under McKinley and then afterwards under Theodore Roosevelt did not aspire to run the entire world, but rather to have a stainless and unimpeachable realm that would be great. And it seems as though not only that we have that, but we have that to develop. And the main points of Mr. Trump's inaugural address were to kind of cement that. He spoke of Panama, and of course, Panama was not simply the place in which the canal would be built, but after McKinley was assassinated and Mr. Roosevelt took over, the canal became a key focus of this new realm because it would link Atlantic and Pacific. But more than that, to build the canal, it took a coup d'etat over Colombia, which was the ruler of what is now Panama. It created a new country called Panama, and that country was happy to give us the rights to the canal and the canal zone. And what Mr. Trump is doing is simply reminding former Colombians, Panamanians for a century and 25 years that, hey, you know, this is part of our patrimony. And he is effectively, by doing this, not so much creating an issue for Panama, which will always do well because they'll always get plenty of money from us. But the fact is, he is, by even mentioning this, he is reclaiming the McKinley vision and not so much going back in time, but essentially saying there is an alternative moving toward the future of a large American realm that is a changeling and a good changeling for the feckless attempt of the United States to run the world as it did after 1991. And this is not so much a fallback as it is the actual proper course the US should have been taking all along.
Do you see opposition?
Sure, there's plenty of opposition, but it won't be very strong. For example, if you look at Greenland, okay, so Greenland, we talked about this. I mean, the Danes sold the Virgin Islands to the US in 1917. The Danish government has not been able to effectively control or govern. I mean, they control, but they don't effectively govern Greenland. It's a drain on their
Yeah.
exchequer.
You see
And
opposition in this country, Germanicus.
oh yes, well there will be potentially, but the fact is, Greenland was declared by Franklin Delano Roosevelt in 1940 to be part of North America, and
You see opposition to Panama to regaining Panama in this country. Is there opposition?
well, there'll be some. I don't think it'll be strong. I
I
think.
haven't heard it yet. Have you? I haven't heard
Pardon
it.
me?
I haven't
No,
heard
I
anyone
haven't
speak.
heard anything. I mean, the fact is that if Panama and Greenland want to be part of the U.S., it doesn't have to be a formal part. It doesn't have to be a state situation. But I think there is plenty of room for the United States to establish the kind of realm that was in the compass. It was in the larger horizon of the
We
McKinley.
have a minute. We have a minute, Germanicus.
The U.S. is creating an alternative empire. It's not a classical empire, but it is a place that will be enormously strong and powerful, but will not be sucked into foreign wars, theoretically and hopefully that a world empire is. The world empire of the U.S. since 1991 was always at war, and it was always at war with places where it should not have been fighting, where it should not have gone. And now to create this alternative realm would essentially allow the U.S. to disengage, to say, hey, this is our area. And by the way, it's a majestic area. It's the entire Western Hemisphere and the Pacific. But we don't have to get engaged.
We're pulling back. Are we leaving NATO? 1 minute, 1 minute. Do we leave NATO in order to take up the Americas?
Well, we shouldn't leave NATO, but we should allow Europe to be its own place. And the greatest crime, and I say this as, not a legal crime, but the greatest thing the Biden administration did that wronged Europe was to try and make them vassals of the U.S., which ended up, destroying their capacity to be independent and autonomous and to make their own decisions. And so, to the extent that we can pull back from this, would be great. It's we don't need to have total control over Europe and to drive it down the way we have the last several years.
Germanicus is Vlahos. I am Gaius, John Batchelor. This is the Friends of History Debating Society. We're in Londinium Special Edition. There's a new emperor in the land. Germanicus sees a bright future for the Americas, the New World. Gaius, I worry about the idea of pardoning people who are not accused. It suggests a defensiveness that is perilous.
I agree.
This is the Friends of History Debating Society. I'm John Batchelor.